When I finally got back home after being away for a few days, I expected to see my garden blooming just the way I left it. That little patch of land had been my pride for years, filled with roses, tulips, and herbs I cared for every morning. But instead of color and life, all I found was bare dirt and trampled soil. My garden was gone. Every single plant had been pulled out as if it never existed. The flower beds ripped apart like they didn't matter. At first, I thought maybe there had been some kind of mistake or even vandalism. But then I found out the truth. HOA Karen had done it herself. She had walked onto my property while I was away and decided that my garden didn't meet community standards. She didn't ask, she didn't warn, and she didn't even have approval from the board. She just acted like she had the authority to decide what could or couldn't be on my land.
Standing there looking at the empty patch.
All I could feel was disbelief and anger. Years of care, time, and effort were gone in an instant. And it was all because Karen thought she could control every thinkerin. Didn't just stop at removing the garden, she had the nerve to justify it. When I confronted her about what happened, she folded her arms and smugly told me that my flowers and plants were a violation of community aesthetics. According to her, the HOA rules were clear. Anything not uniform with the rest of the neighborhood had no place in front of my home. She acted like she was protecting the neighborhood's image, as if my garden full of carefully chosen flowers was some sort of eyesore. The irony was that most of my neighbors loved it. They would walk by, compliment the colors, even stop to ask me how I managed to keep the herbs so fresh and healthy. But in Karen's world, beauty only counted if it fit her narrow vision. She carried around the rulebook like it was a weapon, twisting vague phrases about community standards into her personal authority to control others. What stung the most was the arrogance she genuinely believed she was right, even when she had no official approval from the HOA board to take action. To her, my garden wasn't a labor of love. It was just another chance to enforce her power word. Spread fast in the neighborhood after Karen tore out my garden. People who walked past my house every day stopped and stared at the empty patch of dirt where bright flowers once bloomed. Some of them even knocked on my door, asking what happened because they couldn't believe it was gone. My garden had been part of the neighborhood's charm, something people enjoyed on their evening walks, and suddenly it had vanished without explanation. When they found out Karen was behind it, the reactions were strong shaking heads, muttered words of disbelief, and plenty of frustration. Even the neighbors who usually stayed quiet about HOA drama started speaking up, saying it wasn't right for anyone to just step onto private property and destroy years of work. A few told me they had their own run-ins with Karen from her complaints about lawn decorations to her obsession with mailbox paint colors. It was almost like my garden became the breaking point, the proof everyone needed that Karen had gone too far. The more people talked, the clearer it became that this wasn't just about plants being removed. It was about someone trying to control an entire community with intimidation and false authority after seeing the damage and hearing Karen's so-called justification. I knew I couldn't just let it slide. This wasn't about a few flowers being torn out. It was about my rights as a property owner. I started digging into state laws, reading everything I could about property rights, HOA authority, and where the line was drawn. Didn't take long to realize Karen had crossed it completely. She had no legal standing to touch anything on my land without due process, and the HOA itself couldn't authorize such an action without proper notice and board approval. Armed with that knowledge, I gathered photos of my destroyed garden, copies of the community's guidelines, and statements from neighbors who saw what happened. Then I filed a formal complaint with the State Property Rights Division. It wasn't just about holding her accountable, it was about making sure she understood that real laws carry more weight than her personal preferences. Filling out those forms and attaching all the evidence felt like taking back control. For once, Karen's overreach wasn't going to be settled with gossip or ignored by frustrated neighbors. This time, the matter was going directly into the hands of people who had the power to enforce consequences. The response from the state came quicker than I expected. Within weeks, an investigator reached out to me, asking for additional details and clarifications about what had happened. One provided everything: time stamps, photos, neighbor statements, and even Karen's own words when she bragged about enforcing community standards. The investigator was thorough, asking pointed questions about whether Karen had any written authorization or if the HOA board had ever voted on the removal. Of course, the answer was no. She had acted entirely on her own, assuming no one would challenge her. The state made it clear that property rights are not something to be toyed with, and any violation of them can carry real consequences. They documented everything and initiated an official inquiry into Karen's actions, noting that unauthorized entry and destruction of private property went far beyond what an HOA could regulate. For once, this wasn't just neighborhood drama. It was a matter in the hands of authorities who had the power to impose fines and penalties. Knowing that the situation was being treated seriously gave me a sense of relief. All the frustration of watching my hard work destroyed was finally balanced with the hope that Karen's arrogance was about to catch up with her when the state completed its investigation. The outcome landed directly in Karen's mailbox in the form of an official fine. Neighbors later told me they saw her standing frozen at the end of her driveway, holding the envelope in her hands, staring at it as if it couldn't be real. For years, she had strutted around the community with a sense of untouchable authority, quoting rules and issuing warnings like she was the law herself. But this time, it wasn't just another neighbor rolling their eyes or quietly giving in to her demands. This was the state handing down consequences that couldn't be ignored. The fine wasn't small either. It was a direct reminder that crossing into someone else's property and destroying what didn't belong to you carried a real cost. Suddenly, all her talk about community aesthetics and uniformity didn't matter. The rules she twisted for her own control had no weight compared to the letter she held in her hands. Watching her reaction spread through the neighborhood was almost as satisfying as seeing my garden bloom in the first place. For once, Karen wasn't the one making demands or dishing out orders. She was the one answering for her actions,